Hi there. I'm delighted to be part of your association's gathering today. I was almost delighted enough to get up at 2 a.m. so that I could join you in person, but then decided that probably me being vaguely coherent was more important than me being there in person, and so you're going to get a recording instead. Today we're talking just a little bit about fascia and its role in interoceptive awareness and holding emotion. And then we're going to do a little balance that you can do as a self-balance, or I'll also show you an adaptation so that you can use this to work with your clients. Now, I'm sure that a lot of you are already working with fascia a lot in your practice, but I want to share a few of the things that we do in the GEMS Guardian Element class that you might find interesting and helpful. So we're going to go through this pretty quickly because we only have a few minutes to chat together today. But we want to start by talking about, first of all, how amazing fascia is. I mean, when we talk about fascia, there's so many different manifestations of this in the body, right? Like all of this white stuff here is fascia. And, in this case, fascia is the kind of material that is holding muscle cells together so that the muscle fibers are forming muscles that can function as a unit, and then also banding muscles together so that they work in functional units, like how your quadriceps work, right? But this is also fascia, even though structurally this looks very different. This is the kind of fascia that we're going to find more in the extracellular matrix in the body. So this kind of fascia is binding water and working as a crystalline structure within the body and helping with meridian and electrical flow. And this is also fascia, and this is the kind of fascia that we're going to see that provides structure and protection and shape for all of your organ systems, right? Helping to make sure that things slide and glide and we don't have adhesions and everything is able to breathe the way that it needs to inside your body. And these are just a couple examples of what's actually happening within our fascial system. So when we're talking about fascia, we have both yin and yang kind of tissues that we want to look at. So when we talk about yang tissues are shallower. They are closer to the surface. We're talking about the fascia that is under the skin, that is connecting skin to muscle. We're also talking about muscles themselves. And yang fascia is, for lack of a better word, juicy. All right. Yang fascia holds a lot of water. And so you think about how your muscles are going to expand and they get a lot of extra like blood flow and lymph flow and everything like that when you start working out. The yang fascia increases in size as you move it. And this kind of fascia responds to rhythmic movement and short-term engagement, repetition, strong explosive movement. The kind of exercise that we think of as being exercise is usually working with those yang tissues, right? When we're lifting weights, when you go for a run, that's working with your yang fascia. And the kind of balance that we're going to do today when we do our little protocol is also working with these yang units of fascia. But we also have yin tissue, and yin fascia is a little different. It is deeper, as you would expect, right? This is going to include things like the ligaments and the tendons, the connective tissue that is not only binding bones together, but also binding bone marrow, right? And binding the structure of bone. And yin fascia responds to static loading and holding, slow sustained stretching and posture. You may have heard of yin yoga. And yin yoga is different in that it's not so much about holding an athletic pose. It is much more about relaxing and breathing deeper and deeper into a pose over time, right? If you're doing true yin yoga, often you're holding poses for a minimum of like 10 minutes. And so obviously these are different types of tissue that have different characteristics and that we work with in different ways. And I just find that interesting because in GEMS, in my work, in TCM in general, everything comes back to yin and yang, right? And so if we understand that fascia can also be divided into these different categories, it gives us some ideas of the other characteristics of these tissues that we might apply and different ways that we might balance it within the body, right? Okay, so we've got different kinds of fascia, and we have yin and yang fascia. And fascia also is giving our brain two different kinds of information. One kind is proprioceptive data. And we're super familiar with proprioception in the specialized kinesiology world, right? Because proprioception is our sense of where we are in space. So there's 4 different types of specialized proprioceptive mechanoreceptors in fascia. We have Golgi organs, and this is going to include both Golgi tendon organs and Golgi ligament organs. And you're probably familiar with those from like Touch for Health or your first kinesiology classes. That idea that we can work with those in reference to pain or to kind of manipulate the information that a muscle is sending to the brain about what's going on in the muscle contraction level. We also have Pansini and Ruffini proprioceptors, and those are found more in joints. You may have heard of the Ruffini end organs, for instance, because those are the proprioceptive units that we are kind of piggybacking on when we talk about hip and jaw stacking. That idea that they're always sending information to the brain about where you are in space, but also are you moving and how fast are you moving, and can provide a bit of a broadcasting signal for other information that we want to put into that frequency band. And we have muscle spindle receptors, which we learn about as soon as we start doing muscle testing, because we know we can do things like push to mush and lengthen to strengthen, right? And change the way a muscle is responding based on how we manipulate those spindle receptors. And they're constantly sending data about how the muscle is contracted. And this allows for smooth movement, right? So that's one kind of information stream that's traveling from fascia to brain. But we also have interoception. And this is more where the focus is today, because interoception is not where you are in space, it's how you are. So how are you right now? Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Are you warm or cold? Right? I understand your weather hasn't been great lately. You know, when you see me sitting here in my tank top, it's warm here. I don't know what you're dressed in, but it's probably not this. Things like your heart rate and your breath. You know, how are you right now in your body? And that's going to change depending on your emotional state and when you ate last and how comfortable your chair feels at this moment in time and how balanced you are. And fascia gives us a little window into the interoception of the body. It helps us to understand, helps the brain to understand what's going on. It's always sending this kind of data. Okay? So when we look at this little definition of interoception, if we look here, yeah, interoception helps you understand and feel what's going on inside your body. But I want to bring your attention to this second thing in the box here. Participants with more accurate interoception were more likely to make decisions that aligned with their cardiac activity. As in, if you have a good sense of what's going on inside your body, you might make better decisions for your body, right? And so we can kind of put a pin in that. Interoception is going to be important for us understanding what's going on, but also about our decision-making process and how engaged we are with the world around us, right? So when we are talking about fascia, you know, the definition of fascia has really been broadened in the last few years to include all connective tissues, right? There's a whole list here on this slide. I'm not going to read them all out for you. But basically, the summary of this is that if we take all the things that we now define as fascia and we add it up, it means that this makes up roughly 12.5 kilograms or 17% of total body weight. Subsequently, the estimated number of nerve endings in the body-wide fascial system increased to 250 million. Why is that important? It's important because we often talk about the skin as being the largest sensory organ in the body. And it's true, our skin takes in so much data, right? But fascia actually has more nerve endings than skin. And that means that we have potential to be taking in a huge amount of interoceptive information through the fascia. And if we're not, then we're missing a steady stream of information that could be helping us to make better decisions for our body. This is just a little illustration of those free nerve endings that we're talking about. You see the way that those are diffused through the fascial tissue, right? Okay, so when we are talking about the relationship between fascia and emotions, our emotions set the state of our autonomic nervous system, which directly affects fascia. And it affects fascia in 3 different ways. So first of all, physically, because our emotions and our autonomic nervous system are going to do things like set tension levels and thresholds for muscles and connective tissue. right? When I'm in a sympathetic nervous system state, certain muscles are going to be tense. My shoulders are going to be up in my ears, right? I might notice that contraction and clenching throughout my body. And also, if I'm in a parasympathetic nervous system state, when I'm relaxed, I'm going to notice that physically. It sets the tone for how my body is responding. The emotions are also via the autonomic nervous system having an effect on the fascia chemically. And this is via trophic nerve endings and by regulating the blood and lymph flow to an area. And again, we don't really have the space today to get into that in too much detail, but the way that circulation works via, like whether we're in a sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system state, is going to have an effect on the stimulation of those free nerve endings. And emotionally, as the fascia response triggers an interoceptive response. So when we have an emotion of, let's say, happiness, that's going to have an effect on our autonomic nervous system. That's going to have an effect on our fascia. And that's going to have an effect on how all of our organs and things are feeling, right? My guts feel a different way when I'm delighted than when I'm anxious. My breathing is doing a different thing if I'm fearful than if I'm relaxed, right? We know that this becomes a feedback loop because here we're talking about how emotions are affecting the nervous system, are affecting the fascia, but it also goes the other way, right? So what's happening at the level of the fascia is also going to be sending information upstream via the vagus nerve and some of that afferent flow to the brain to let the brain know what's going on. And that's then going to have an effect on my emotions and on my autonomic nervous system, right? If I'm clenched and I don't know why, I might start creating reasons for myself for why I feel that way. Or I might just feel vaguely anxious and have a hard time in social situations and things without context, without knowing even how to balance myself in this case. So, because of this feedback loop that we were just discussing, any intervention on the fascia is also an intervention on the autonomic system. Anytime you do anything to the fascia in the body, you are changing the way the nervous system is working at that moment in time. And that's awesome news for us because the fascia is relatively easy to work with. It's everywhere. We can't do anything in the body without working with fascia. So this gives us all kinds of tools, right? Okay. So when we talk about this idea of interoception, interoception is important because if there is a misrepresentation of our internal state at the level of the brain, or a disconnect between the signals at a physiological level and the interpretation by the brain, this is strongly correlated with a wide range of mental health diagnoses, including anxiety and depression. The more aware we are of how we feel, even if how we feel is negative at that moment in time, the better our mental health actually is in a lot of ways, right? We need to be aware because that, again, allows us to make decisions that are going to be in our highest good. And according to the Tao of trauma, if we have a lack of interoceptive capacity, it can put our very survival at risk. The greater our interoceptive capacity, the more successful we will be at navigating life. Now, this is important because often if there is trauma, especially in childhood, we might have a belief system that gets imprinted in there really early on that says it's not safe for me to feel. It's not safe for me to really tap in to what's going on within my body. And we might start disassociating those things. And that creates a lot of stress later on. Right? And we end up with emotions and trauma that get locked into the body and get locked into movement patterns. And we end up not being able to really figure out how we feel about stuff as we move forward. And I don't know about you, but one thing I hear a lot from my students and sometimes from my clients is I would like to be more intuitive. I would like to be able to really kind of know which things are right for me. I would like to be able to really feel connected when I'm with a client or into myself. And interoception is the gateway for this, and fascia is the gateway for interoception. All right. So this brings us to the kind of protocol that I want to share with you today, and to this idea that if you move, you can control your emotion. As in, if we can do something, remember, any intervention on the fascia is an intervention on the autonomic nervous system, which is going to also affect our emotion, which is going to affect our fascia, and so on and so forth, right? And remember, if we are moving, we're engaging yin and yang fascia, depending on the kind of movement that we are actually making. Movement can release some of the stored injury, postural stress, and emotional tension from the fascia. Think about maybe your first Touch for Health class when you get to that postural stress release balance that we do in level 4. I've been teaching Touch for Health for like 17 years or something like that. And that is always one of the most powerful balances that we do in class. There are certain emotions and certain traumas that even though they've been balanced and balanced and balanced and balanced, we don't see the full extent of them and we don't get the full release until we put the person into a position. The movement is such an important thing for actually getting the closure and being able to actually work through that emotion and that trauma, right? So that brings us to this balance where what I've done is taken our normal 5 elements that we work with, added the emotions that tend to get stuck in those elements, right? We're all familiar with how our 5 element emotions work, but we are also adding a movement for each one of these. Now, when we're talking about the movement for each one, I want you to think about this in a very similar way to how we think about like a sound balance. So for instance, with a sound balance, we can have a sound that we need to make that has been underexpressed, right? Maybe what I actually need to do is to shout, but it's never been okay for me to shout. So I just go, I couldn't possibly, and diffuse that in some other way, right? We see a lot of resistance with our students and with our clients when we try to bring up some of those repressed sounds, right? Conversely, there can also be sounds that are being overexpressed. Somebody who's constantly giggling instead of dealing with the thing that they need to deal with. Someone who is so shouty that it feels like they're yelling at everyone all the time, even when there's nothing wrong. Right? So we can have like under and over expression when we're looking at a sound balance. And it's the same kind of thing with the movement. You might have a movement pattern that has been underexpressed. So an example of that, if we look at the top there, would anger forwards. Maybe there was a time when what your body wanted to do in that scenario was move forward and attack, right? Or move towards something that was exciting, but it wasn't okay to. For some reason, you couldn't. It wasn't safe. And therefore, that movement is stuck. It didn't get a chance to happen. And now the trauma, the emotion, the situation, whatever, is locked in the tissues. And conversely, there can be something that is overexpressed. Maybe I find myself constantly, as a result of that, even moving backward. I'm always kind of shying away from things or feel like I'm always defending myself against things. So there's over and under energy. And at the end of the day, what we want to do is actually move through all of these elements, bringing in the emotion when it's appropriate and making the movement so that we can release what's stuck in the body. So when we do this today, we're going to do this all together, and we're going to go through the entire system so that we actually are expressing all of the movements. But I do want to point out that if you want to do this as a balance with your client, of course, what you could do is challenge for your priority to start, or maybe there's only one movement that actually needs to happen. So you can use your muscle testing to determine, are we looking at under or over energies, and where does the body need to begin, and how many elements do we actually need to work with? And then this can be a little correction for some of the stuff that you're already doing. Okay, so we're going to pause there, and then we're going to go ahead and work with this whole balance together. Okay, so it's a new day, and I have gathered people to do the balance with us so that we can do it outside as well. And so now might be a good time for all of you to find a spot in the room where you can stand and move around a little bit while I'm explaining what we're going to be doing together here. So with the movement balance, remember the chart that I was just showing, it looks a little more like an older 5-element chart, right? You've got the earth element in the middle, and then you have wood up at the top, and you kind of are moving around. And so we're going to start by working with the earth element. We're going to move through all of the elements in turn, kind of coming back to a place of stillness between each set of movements. And then we're going to finish with the earth element at the end. So for all of us here, because we're doing this as a self-balance, we're going to work through all of the elements. Maybe take a moment to do a bit of a self-assessment, right? So I don't know if you've been sitting for a while already today, or what time it is exactly for you, but check in, like, how are you feeling in your body? Do you have areas of stiffness or pain? Do you have stress? Are you feeling a little low energy at this moment in time? If you were doing this with a client, again, you would probably already have things in your circuit that you're using this to balance, and you would maybe use an indicator muscle to challenge what is the priority starting point, or if there's only certain elements that you're going to be working on. Okay, so once you've had that second to notice, now we're going to start actually doing the movement altogether. So you'll notice with the earth element, it's about stillness, right? But we can be still in a couple different ways. We can be still from a place of panic, I'm frozen, I don't know how to go from here. Or we can be still from a much more grounded place. So to start, find that feeling in your body of being frozen and stuck. And you can create some tension and notice how that feels to be in that spot of I can't move, I don't know how to move, I feel frozen right now. And as soon as I create that tension in my body, I feel it in my stomach, I feel it in my jaw, and just notice it. Okay, and then we're going to move from there into the wood element. Now, so the emotion that we work with wood is anger, right? The movement is to go forward, and it's a sharp movement. So think about stepping forward and maybe doing a punch, right? Or you can step forward and do a push, because this might be about boundaries. This might be about get out of my space. So let's go do it together. And you can let yourself kind of feel that. And once you've done a few repetitions, stop and come to stillness again. And then we're going to move into the fire element, which is about joy, and the movement is vertical. So it's a stretch, it's something light, you can come up on your toes, right? You can have a little bit of sway, the movement feels easy, it feels joyful, you can jump if you want. Okay, back to stillness. Then we're going to move into the metal element, which we know is about grief, sadness, right? The movement is down. So feel yourself sinking downward. The body is soft, right? There's some slumping, curling. Maybe you stretch all the way down. It's heavy, right? The fire element is light and lifts you up, and the metal element is low. And then come back to stillness. And then we're going to move into the water element, which is about fear, right? So it's the opposite of the wood. For wood, we're moving forward and attacking. With the water, we're moving backward and defending. So take a step back and create some defense. Or it might look like hugging yourself, right? And kind of curling up, moving backward, turning away. And after a few movements, come back to stillness again. And now we're in the earth element for the second time. But this time, it's not I'm frozen. This time it's like a mountain pose in yoga, right? It's that idea of I'm standing in stillness, I'm centered, I'm grounded. Feel your feet on the floor. Feel that space of like, I'm not moving right now, but I could move easily in any direction and respond appropriately to what's happening. Okay, and that's it. So, what did you notice as you were going through all of these movements, right? You may have noticed that some of the movements feel difficult.
or you feel silly doing them. You may have noticed that some emotion came up as you were moving through some of those patterns. So the way that this applies in real life, you think about how maybe there was a time when you wanted to move forward and be able to attack, but you couldn't, right? That energy can get stuck there. Or maybe there was a time when you needed to be able to defend yourself and you could not. Or maybe one of these movements has become a habit. It's become such a program to slump and be soft, and you need to bring in the opposing movement that lets you open and be joyful. So I would love to hear how this all works for you and what your experience has been with it. And this is on YouTube, so you can come back to this and work with it yourself or give it to your clients or something to play with as homework. Thank you so much for including me, and I hope you have an amazing gathering for the rest of the day.